Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast.
Welcome back to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and we're starting season 2 today. Simon, I feel a little bit like we need to ease ourselves into this. I don't have match fitness yet, so I think it's a very good thing. It's just me and you and no guests, so we can cock up and not be embarrassed in front of people. But how you feeling? You ready?
Yeah, I had an extremely heavy New Year's Eve out of the blue for some reason. It took a couple of days to recover from that, but I am ready for 2022. I think it's going to be a big year for first party data, lead generation, and hopefully everyone involved in it is doing good things.
That's good, because at least people listening, we know we will be of the same opinion. Will agree with us on that at least, because they want the same thing. I'd ask you generally about your Christmas and stuff, but I know people aren't tuning in for our small talk. So instead, I'll go to the episode title, which is "What Big Things Can We Expect in 2022?" I figured like it was a good start to this season to just kick things off slightly with just a few loose predictions about the kind of things we expect to see. So with that in mind, what we're saying, what do you reckon will happen this year in this world?
Okay, so these are my predictions. So there's a very strong chance they may not come true, but I think they will. So I would say, well, let me begin. 2 years ago, I was on someone else's podcast, Michael Frere's, the Lead Generation World one, and he asked me about the future of lead gen, what I thought it would be, and I mentioned at the time that I thought that building relationships with people would almost become as important as generating lead in the first place, because of only like 15-20% of leads convert, and the value that you get actually all comes from the post relationship. In those 2 years since then, that literally hasn't changed. So that prediction at that moment, I'm saying that I was arguing was going to happen in 2022. I think this is the year that lead nurturing is going to take off. And when I say take off, it's going to take off in the sense that people will probably start to realize, like, shit, we need to get like heavily involved in this. So whether people actually do or not, it'll start becoming more. And the reason is, number one, third-party cookies have died, right? And that doesn't necessarily apply to a lot of people involved in lead generation, because they were already not necessarily driving traffic or anything that way. But what it means is that a lot of the brands that were relying on third-party cookies are now going to be looking at other ways to interact with prospects and generate leads, or show ads and things. So I expect a lot of that to be done in the way that you generate leads. So from that means all the ad networks or ad platforms costs are going up, because it's like a supply and demand thing. There's going to be more and more people running ads and everything. I mean, this is something that Gary Vaynerchuk predicted like years ago, right? Where he was like, get involved in Facebook and whatever else now, because the costs are going up. I see those costs continuing to rise. And because of that, generating a lead is just going to become so much more expensive. And everyone's going to want first-party data and zero-party data and whatever else to be able to communicate with their prospects effectively. So I wrote a LinkedIn post the other day. It was like a piece of first-party data in the hand is worth like 2 in the bush. So the way that you can only then realize the value of data when you collect it and get an ROI on the ad costs that you've already spent, and I don't know, whatever else, is to really carry out an effective lead nurturing program. And that isn't so that every lead converts immediately. This is so that when you have a problem, or when a person has a problem, they think of you to solve it, because you're giving them that much value that you become the company that they think of. And the other thing is, you've got to remember, if you start looking at this is people talk about this in B2B all the time, but it's the same in B2C. word of mouth is how a lot of business happens, right? So if I ask you a question, I don't know, like, I'm thinking of getting a pair of trainers, you'll have a thought in your mind already of a trainer company and you might even own one, or they've really like effectively advertised to you. So you could say Nike or Adidas or Reebok, whoever. But from your suggestion, I might do something about it. But your suggestion might be driven just because you were nurtured well to. You've not necessarily bought a pair of those trainers, but you've received that much value from that company that you tell me that's the one that I should buy. And this is why I think lead nurturing will start going up in 2022. I don't think it's going to like take off, because it takes years for companies to get this like ball rolling properly. But I think it's the year that companies will realize they need to start doing it.
Well, by definition, it's a long-term thing, isn't it? It's not going to just be like, you can't really measure when it's sort of reached its peak. It's just something that you start doing. But
that was a really long-winded answer to the first one, so I'll try and make it quicker.
There's no rules to it, but we'll talk through them. But a couple of points to that.
Yeah.
One is, I remember that podcast. I can't believe that's 2 years ago. That's mental. I can have an existential crisis.
Well, COVID's killed time, hasn't it? It's like,
So was that pre-COVID? That's crazy.
No, I think it was. I can't even remember. I'd have to check. I can't remember, but it was roughly 2 years ago.
But also, just to sort of follow up on that, it's a little bit like, do you know when people like predict the end of the world, and then like the world doesn't end, and then they just got to keep, we made a mistake, and it's like, it's this year, so you're like, this is the year, if we don't get to, if it doesn't take off, people are doing it, then
I just think it is as well, because I'm just seeing more and more people talk about it. I mean, we've been talking, not listening to like blow our own trumpet or anything on this, but we've been talking about this for quite a long time, because it's just obvious, right? I mean, it's because data's been really cheap. I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to. Everything goes in like cycles. So when data is cheap, rather than like try and build a relationship, you just keep buying more and more data. But now data is going to become more expensive. What's the obvious thing? You have to build a relationship.
Well, that was kind of the next point I'm going to make was, it is relatively, it's kind of a bit like, I don't know how I think of like retargeting. You pay for that first ad, and then it's a lot cheaper to hit them again. And nurturing's, I guess, sort of similar in that sense. Like you've got the information. It's not like a massive cost. Then it's like, obviously there's a cost of time, right? Email. But do you think, what I can ask you is, do you think costs are going to continue to rise, like in the spending, like next year as well, which will kind of further?
What's that, ad costs, you mean?
Yeah, like you feel like, because ad costs are rising.
Yeah. That was actually the second point I was going to raise, that like costs of generating leads will just continue to rise. Because
you don't carry on though.
Yeah, I mean, because everyone wants first party data now, right? Because it's almost like a bomber's hit, and like reality has dawned of basically like the third party cookie stuff and a lot of the programmatic stuff that people were doing, and banners and things like that. Just, I'm sure some of it works if you have like a direct relationship with the publisher who's showing your ads, but if you're like on these exchanges and stuff, I mean, when we had Dr. Augustine Fu on, he proves like 90% of it's just bullshit. So imagine that like realization has suddenly struck, and it's been forced anyway. And so, and again, it's not someone I particularly like admire or anything, but Gary Vaynerchuk predicted it. He's been going on about it for years, that, the ad costs on platforms are just going to rise and rise and rise, because more and more and more companies are just going to get involved in them. So I see that it'll have like positive effects, because it'll probably drive a lot of the companies out that are just sort of generating poor quality leads, or doing stuff that isn't necessarily like, the best use of someone's personal data. But it's going to have other knock-on effects, which I don't fully know what's going to happen. So one thing I was thinking, and this is something else that people have been predicting since GDPR, so 2018 kicked in, is that co-reg sites will make a comeback, because they offer like a cheap way to collect first-party data for brands. Whether or not that'll happen, I don't know. And I think they'd have to be tied to like supreme quality for it to happen, or not just quality, intent. So issue that a lot of co-reg sites have had in the past. I mean, so everyone used to use them, right? So you go back like 10 years, everyone used to use co-reg sites that were booming, or even 15 years ago. But it's a bit like what we're talking about now. What slowly starts happening is you realize that a lot of co-reg leads are effectively marketing qualified leads, not really sales qualified leads. And what happens is companies are using them in like call centers stuff from a sales qualified perspective. So if you could have a co-reg site that could opt data in at a cheaper rate and offer either a sales qualified lead, or companies start realizing don't use it in a sales qualified perspective, use it from a marketing qualified perspective, which comes with its own challenges for them. Could they make a comeback? I don't know, but I can guarantee one thing, which is people will, just because it's their natural instinct, will want to get the cost down of the first party data that they're looking to collect.
What's interesting there is, because you're right, when I think of co-reg, I'm honest, my first impression is not, I don't think high quality. That's not like, and I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but typically, like, even when we had Hein on the show, like right at the start of last year, he was talking, he kind of said, you know, co-reg can be a part of your marketing. It's like you can bulk stuff out. But what he said, and it was interesting, is you can link that to the nurturing thing too. Like, could it be a case that people start thinking, oh yeah, we can't just buy loads of high quality, we can't afford that, but we can get some co-reg in, and then we can start to nurture alongside that, and then we push them up the funnel. Like, is that potentially something that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, this all depends on the appetite for first party data that brands would have, right? So if they just want to fill a marketing team's bucket with a load of data so that they can carry out their magic, whatever that would be, I just see it as being a way they could do it. I mean, what are the alternatives? You know, they do like CPM or CPL email blasts. We're not going to do CPL email blasts because they may as well, they're sort of doing that already via affiliate networks, or CPA blasts. You know, yeah, CPM email blasts with people. They could buy Facebook form driven leads. I mean, I've yet to meet a person on earth who's made that work. They're cheaper than doing it to your own landing page or own form, right? But it's, the problem is it's all the data that people entered 15 years ago when they signed up to Facebook, and it gets pre-populated on the form. So I don't know. The prediction is the cost on ad platforms will continue to rise. It will push people out because the quality that they're looking to generate won't be available at the cost they want. What they're going to do, don't know.
Just, it's interesting actually, because we tend to focus on the buyers, I would say, more. Like, and even now we're thinking about things from the buyer perspective, what they can do to, you know, make more sales and use marketing effectively. But as you're saying this, demand is going up. Like, in time, supply will go up to meet that of first party data. Theoretically, that will follow eventually. But is this a good time for lead generators, in the sense that demand's going up, but there's not a huge amount of supply out there? Like, is this a great time this year for lead generators to maybe to cash in, for want of a better word?
Yeah, I would have thought so. I think that's why, you know, companies like MVF, Social Blue, DoLead, there's a few American ones, are sort of doubling down on quality, I think. So rather than looking at volume there, they're going for a quality play. So that's what I think it's all going to become about at the sort of top end, because people want the sales. I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to, because a lot of the companies that buy the leads are buying it from the sales team. So the sales team are taking the leads in, doing whatever they do, calling it, email, you know, SMSing it, whatever, and then expecting results off the back of it. So it's an interesting point, because it's sort of this like marketing versus sales silo that exists in a lot of big brands, where they just don't work together and have their own budgets and targets and whatever else. This is why I'm thinking that if marketing get more involved, because lead nurturing becomes more of an aspect that people focus on, are they going to see the nurturing as the part that the revenue or the CPA goes behind rather than the sale? And that's why I'm thinking, do they go for cheaper leads from a marketing perspective? So then they'll start buying co-reg leads. Or, I mean, it might not be co-reg leads, it might be something else, but I'm just thinking of something that's like a lower value where you get an opt-in to first-party data.
Well, yeah, so what we've got there, I forget what we're on now. We're on a list, but
yeah,
we've done lead nurturing.
We've done 2 points.
We've done the cost generate leads might go up.
Yeah, so my third point is for brands collecting first-party data, which they're all going to, zero-party data is going to become paramount. We covered this in a podcast before Christmas, before this year, about progressive profiling. It's really funny, zero-party data, right? So in the podcast that we basically spoke about, we called it progressive profiling, but it's talking about what people call zero-party data. If you'd have gone back 5 years ago, it didn't even exist. It was just first-party data or like information getting added to first-party data. But now, the latest thing is zero-party data, and this is information that a prospect of yours consents to give you with the idea that you can market to them more effectively or serve them better effectively. So an example would be, I mean, we covered a lot of them in the stuff about progressive profiling. But let's say we do it in Dateable, right? So when we have our database, we ask them questions to find out like a pot that they go into so that we can actually give them information that's more relevant. So that's really what it's about, because the whole point of lead nurturing is giving value, right? I mean, it's just pointless otherwise. And this is where people fall down on it. And it's why collecting zero-party data is so important, because it is impossible to give someone value if you don't know what they find valuable. And really, that's what you're looking to derive from it.
And to clarify there, in case you haven't listened to that episode and you listened to this one, progressive profiling is the act of asking questions that elevates it from first-party data to zero-party data. It kind of is essentially the way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, and zero-party data that can also be metadata, right? It doesn't. We're talking about it from almost another first-party data perspective, which is like tagging on like an extra bit of information to them. But it could also be like, I don't know, you consent to X or Y metadata about you being collected as well, which can also be, you know, handy in marketing to people. So I see zero-party data becoming something that is like a mainstream term. So it's relatively mainstream now, but I think a lot of people don't either understand what it means or do it at all. But I think it will become something that is just like a regular marketing objective, because if you are going to carry out effective lead nurturing, you need to know more about the people that you're nurturing to.
Makes sense. So yeah, first-party data, the rise of zero-party data in 2022.
Yeah. Number four. This is something that we covered with Daryl Alfonso.
Amazon. That's right.
That marketing operations will become a role that companies realize they need to fill. So we experienced this, right? And I guarantee I could ring up another SaaS company that does a similar thing to us, where we have like self-service clients. What's the number one problem that we know we have at Dateable?
In terms of the people not able to use it and actually do it.
It's non-technical users trying to carry out technical tasks.
More succinct way to put it, but yeah.
And when I say technical, I mean we're like no-code software, right? So it's technical from the sense of like putting in it's like using Zapier, for example, where you're putting a URL to send API out or something, and then know the fields and what they have to map to and things. So what that role is a marketing operations or like technical services role. And so what you'll find is a lot of companies can't market effectively because they don't have that role filled, which is why a lot of lead nurturing and stuff like collection of zero-party data doesn't happen. It's because they don't have that technical person sitting in a role that is able to stitch different elements of like their CRM together, a dialer to a CRM, an ESP to their CRM, an SMS system there, to be able to create like a single customer view of that person and find out all the different marketing aspects that have happened to it. So this person can often be also a designer, and they can be the person that like carries out the strategy of the marketing, but oftentimes they're not. It's actually someone who's a bit like a front-end developer, who understands like how data flows, how landing pages need to be put together, how APIs need to be set up, like how to put emails in a sequence and things. And so, you know, we offer it as like a service to our clients, right? So I'd say, I don't know, the percentage. There's a percentage of clients on Dateable that use our services from marketing operations, because as a company, we're full of people like that, right? They just know how to do all that stuff. Most it's unusual, but it's because it's what our software does. Most companies don't have that role, which is why we do it for people. I know a bunch of other companies that do a similar thing. But I think that if we are going on this path, it's funny really, because a lot of these things keep coming back to this lead nurturing thing. If you are going to nurture effectively to leads, which is effectively build a relationship with them, offer them like extreme value so that you're top of mind when they think of the problem you solve, and you're hitting them via the channel that they want to be communicated on, whether that's email, SMS, postal, retargeting, whatever, two-way chat on SMS, WhatsApp, could be anything. I think that this like marketing operations role is one that people are going to have to seriously start thinking about filling. A lot of companies don't have it, right? It's just not something they think about. It's because it's all like sales driven. Everything is like make a sale, especially at like an SME level. When you go to brands, they often have these roles, but they're a bit like the marketing and sales stuff we were talking about. They're incredibly siloed. So then they'll have like the technical team. They have to do almost like their own purchase order from the sales team, and it's just why stuff never happens, because there's just so many different siloed departments. But this marketing operations is the glue that knits all of this together. It's the person or the team that can join all this, make all this stuff happen, the executor of this marketing that we're talking about. So I see that coming to the forefront this year, where people start thinking, hold on, if we're going to start doing this stuff, we need a person like this. It's great for people that do that sort of stuff, right? I think it's a really like unappreciated role. It's something that Darryl Alfonso touched on as well.
Well, I was just going to add to that and say, as someone who is who's come to marketing from the creative side of it, that person to me is always like the dream who can make stuff happen. Like we massively value those people who I can sort of say, can you get this made for me? Can you sort this out? I can just focus on the more traditional, I guess, marketing side of it. But yeah,
I think it's funny. I think it's funny at Dateable that we actually unappreciate them from a different perspective, because it's basically like our entire company is made of people like that. And so we've always thought this is how all companies operate and have people like, because everyone's got such a deep understanding of this stuff. But it's unusual. It's only because it's what we do. If you're, I don't know, a company over there that sells chairs, you have like literally zero idea that it's probably even a role.
True, and it's interesting that of all the companies in the world, like Amazon, like the biggest. Very much leading the way as you'd expect in having that huge department and doing that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I can't remember. I mean, there were some brilliant quotes from the interview with Darryl, but if you've not listened to that episode with Darryl Alfonso, check that out too, because I think that more sort of succinctly, or I guess
he's basically much better explaining it than I am. Is what you're trying to say.
Well, I can say better than either of us, but of all people, like he was great. He's a leader in that field, so you want to hear more about it and check out with him. Last point.
So the fifth and last point is regulations. So there's a load of noise in 2021 around the FCA and the regulations on Google and like all the financial services stuff, that you need to be FCA regulated. And, you know, are we going to see more of this driving into other verticals? And this isn't necessarily just regulation from stuff like the FCA. It could be the ASA, which again has got more involved on like ads from Facebook and Google and things like that. So is lead generation going to grow up and become more professional effectively, so that it drives out, and not necessarily people doing stuff wrong, but, you know, the more sort of spurious generators of leads that will use strange ads or stuff that isn't necessarily true and correct in order to generate leads, or, you know, hasn't signed up to X in order to be able to prove that they should be able to collect that information. And it's interesting that it's sort of going in hand with this idea that companies are going to be wanting to collect a lot more first-party data, because will it move lead generation more into the mainstream? But by doing so, it's going to become a lot more regulated by like a host of other stuff.
Yeah, 100%. I think as well, I mean, I'm sure there are examples where it doesn't happen, but it feels like regulation kind of follows after us to a degree. Like, it very rarely is it always like in place from the start, and then people just like behave. It tends to be people sort of push it a little bit, and then regulations are required. So as we predicted throughout this, like first party data becomes more important and demand for it more important, like it seems inevitable that regulations will get more strict, I guess.
Yeah, well, the thing is, and we actually touched on this in a podcast, I can't even remember which one, last year, some point, where we talked about the low barrier to entry in lead generation.
Yeah.
Like, you can literally set a company up and generate leads in a day, and, you know, collecting someone's first party data and selling it to someone else. I mean, that has its own like advantages, but at the same time, you know, if you're taking first party data incredibly seriously, and the verticals that you're operating in, if it's not your company especially that's going to be buying that end data, sort of feels like it, you know, would need to be more regulated potentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, yeah, we'll see. We'll have to come back to this. Let's do the same thing next year, provided we're still going.
What we should do is, like, on, you know, in 2023, the first return that we have, we'll play this podcast, then we can cover it and go what we said in 2022, and then we'll go, well, that was absolute bullshit. Why did we say all that?
Take little snippets. You say so, that's wrong. Yeah. That never happened. Well, yeah, I think that was a good way into it, and actually, I think we've covered more than I expected to in that, you know, for a first one back. So yeah, we're going to be getting some guests again joining us, and if you are listening to this and think either you've been a guest before and you want to come back on and talk about something different, or if you haven't been a guest but you'd like to come and talk about something, by all means message us. The final point I want to end on is actually, I think we'd call it, but not a massively serious thing, but we are considering changing the name of this show. It's currently the B2C Lead Gen podcast, which is very much does what it says on the tin, 5, which we put in because we've got nothing else. But we think we need to be a little bit more creative with it, and maybe we were going to rebrand it at some point. So if you listen to this and you've got any ideas, do you know what I'll do? In Spotify, if you listen to it on Spotify, you can have a little thing where you can ask questions now. So I'll put a little thing there, and if you listen to this and you've got any ideas for the podcast, you can leave us suggestions, or just, you know, offensive insults if you prefer to do that.
Like two blokes talking shit.
Too much talking shit, yeah. We would look. That's all we've been taken. I'm sure that must exist. Yeah, any suggestions for the titles, by all means, send them our way, because we're struggling to think of one that isn't just saying what it does. But I think most people change after a while, don't they? So yeah, we'll look into that at some point soon. But yeah, that was season 2, and that was the first episode. What big things can we expect in 2022?
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.